Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rennie, and today we're getting mindful about mental health, healthy masculinity, and self-improvement. And joining me for today's discussion, I've got Gareth Shanthikumar from WA. How you going, Gareth?
Good, thanks. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you on. We're talking off there about how I saw you at the International Mental Health Conference talking about Man Up, and so I'm really keen to unpack what that is today. But to introduce you to my audience, Gareth, you're a co-founder of Man Up, which is a non-for-profit organisation that goes to high schools to talk to young boys about healthy masculinity, and I love this concept, and their mental health as well. But before we get into about what Man Up does, I'd love to hear a bit more about you and where you're from, where'd you grow up, what's some of the influences that kind of made you into the guy that you are today.
For sure. So as you said, my name is Gareth, and I'm 25 years old. I'm from Perth, WA, and originally my family were from Sri Lanka, and I think that plays quite a big role into why I do this work as well. So currently my sort of career pathway, so obviously, yes, co-founder of Man Up. I'm also a personal trainer outside of that. And with that, I do a bit of mindfulness coaching as well. I would say my goal/purpose, in life is to really just help people discover that all they really need is themselves to step in and level up. I love to help people to become a better version of themselves through fitness, through mindset, and realizing that the power is always within. So that's kind of who I am and what I do. And I'm still working on that. I'm relatively young as well, so I'm new to this world. But I'm really excited to kind of see where it takes me. As I mentioned, I'm from Sri Lanka. So with Man Up and kind of this whole journey around where I started the whole mental health journey kind of would have began from a cultural point of view. And that's simply being that my culture, being of this ethnic kind of background, is we don't really talk about these issues. Mental health isn't a discussion that's had. And it wasn't until I was about 20 years old that I realized that I was actually going through my own sort of mental health struggle. But I just didn't accept it or even realize it happening within me, and I definitely had a lot of underlying subconscious stereotypes of masculinity. I felt like I had to figure out things on my own. I felt like I wasn't allowed to be stressed out, and I had to, just put my head down and get through it and don't be weak. And I guess on an external level, I definitely knew that doing these things were bad for my mental health. But I just kept doing them because it was so subconscious within my own mind. And I think, like I said, my culture, we don't talk about mental health. In fact, because it's a country that's come from, I guess, such struggle, survival is actually the goal. It's how can we make money? How can we just survive? Your mental health is not an important thing. You just get through it. And that's kind of what I noticed from my parents growing up as well. They were just really focused on the grind, just getting through life and giving a good future for me and my sister, which they eventually did. And I think as I was going through my teenage years and entering into the real world, I noticed that there was tension within my body around what I'm doing with my life, what my purpose is. And I didn't know how to deal with that emotion within me because I've never learned how to emotionally navigate. And so 2017 was a very difficult year where I was just so in my own head. I had these things going on in my life, problems with my relationship, issues with my career, and even my university degree, which I was really unhappy with. But I just put it all aside. I was like, ignore it, just get through it, we'll be all good. As the year kind of went on, I just got worse, my mental health manifested in other ways that were quite harmful. I started to get really angry. I started to get into a lot of arguments with the people around me. And I started to drink heaps of alcohol as well, man. That's a way to escape. And look, at the time, I didn't realize it was unhealthy because when you're in uni, drinking alcohol is normal. Getting angry is a normal thing for a man to do. So I didn't look at it in a bad way. And it was only at the end of the year where I kind of had this whole episode where I have to go to the hospital due to a self-harming incident. And then a week after that, my girlfriend broke up with me. that I really had this wake up moment where I was like, whoa, like, what have I been doing? Like, where is my mind? Who am I, without this identity of being a man? And that was kind of the whole journey around why I became the person I am today. It was this wake up, this realization of, wow, there's so much more to life. And all we need to do is learn to discover like our own power. And with that, we can help others as well. And that's kind of where Man Up came about, because I was huge on trying to help the men in my life. And I noticed that all of them were just going through similar issues. So yeah, bit of a long story, but that's who I am and my story around all this.
Yeah, wow. I'm interested, like, when you ended up in hospital, and I guess this is a very overt moment where the internal becomes external, because all of a sudden you're in hospital for a self-harm incident, which people generally say, okay, what's going on internally for you to do that?
Mm-hmm.
From a cultural perspective, what did your parents say about that? Or do they not know? Or yeah, how have their response been to you, I guess, coming out and sharing your mental health journey?
Yeah. I mean, that night, they weren't actually in Perth. So it was just my sister and my ex-girlfriend who had taken me. But I think more than anything, they were just scared. They're like, whoa, And I think that's a really core message, because a lot of the brown audience, people from ethnic backgrounds, they live in fear of their parents. But I think deep down, all our parents want for us is just what's best, right? And so when they saw me like in a very bad place, like hurting myself and in this really bad place, like they were like, doesn't matter what our reputation is or whatever like that, we want to take care of you. And so even to this day, like they are a lot more open to this whole mental health thing now, because they themselves have also been through their own kind of struggle, going through separation and stuff as well. And I think when I went through that struggle, when they went through a struggle, it was very similar timings. It kind of opened up this box of vulnerability within our family. And so now talking about what's on our mind is like a normalized thing, which it wasn't before. We just had to push through that barrier within ourselves as a family, which is I'm very grateful for. And I think even my dad to this day, like he still is a bit unsure about like what Man Up actually does, but he's very supportive of it. And they've always helped me, which has been like a really great sign.
Yeah.
But I think it took like that tragedy almost happening for them to really realize, oh, this is real. It's not just a struggle that we hear about on the TV or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's improved your relationship with your family?
Yeah, way more. Like we're closer than we ever were. And I think, I talk about vulnerability a lot. I think vulnerability is like that driving force for connection, because that's how we're bonded in this earth. It's the things that we go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's funny how you say you're saying how in your culture, like you don't really talk about that. And a lot of what I talk about on the Mindful Men podcast is very much in Australian culture. I think we have for a long time really struggled to talk about this. My background is one of the northern suburbs of Adelaide in South Australia, and it's very working class, lower socioeconomic in the 80s and 90s as well. So, in that period of time, nobody talked about mental health at all. And it was only until, I think, even more the last 10 years that we're starting to have these open discussions around mental health. So it's actually quite similar. And it's interesting how you say it. Your culture doesn't talk about that. What about with your mates, though? And, they saw you drinking a lot and doing some of this stuff. Did anybody set you aside and say, hey, what's going on, Gareth? You're doing this? Or was it all pretty much boys will be boys type stuff?
It was definitely a bit of both, man. And I think this kind of goes into the whole masculinity discussion, because I went to an all boys school. We were taught to really just like be a man, you know what I mean? Showing our emotions is like not necessary. And I guess the whole drinking and stuff at the start, it was very like normalized, like, oh, Gaz, come have a beer with us, let's get lit, whatever it was. But then there were definitely moments where I was very lucky that I had very caring friends, and they could notice changes in my behavior, right? So not necessarily the drinking as such, but the way I showed up in other areas of my life. And I remember there was this one night actually where a very close friend of mine, he grabbed me by the shoulders as a party, and we were both a little bit drunk at the time. And he had a tear rolling down his face, and he said, Gareth, like, I have a feeling something's up with you. Can you please like talk to me? But being the man that I was back then, I literally just shut him off. I said, F off, bro. Like, I'm all good, And I guess it goes into the reason I said that was because I didn't want to appear as weak to him. Although deep down, I knew that he would care for me and be there. I still had this pressure that came from masculinity, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in a second, that really just held me back from opening up in that moment. So it was a bit of both, but I think I was very grateful to have a group of friends that were a bit more open to these discussions than maybe other men in Australia.
And I assume that they were really by your side after that hospital moment?
Yeah, every single day I had a friend come to my house, literally take care of me, take me to the beach, take me to the movies. And in my opening up of my vulnerability, that's when they started opening up to me about their stuff as well.
Wow. So let's talk about healthy masculinity versus, I guess, traditional or unhealthy masculinity. I mean, not all aspects of traditional masculinity are unhealthy,
Yeah.
but Man Up and the work that you do is all around bringing out this healthy masculinity. So can you tell us a bit about what that is in your words and why is it important?
Of course. And I think you raise a really great point. Traditional masculinity is not unhealthy at all. There are certain traits that we need to embody in our culture, and both men and women and anyone can present masculine qualities, right? Qualities such as assertiveness, independence, things like that, right? And I think masculinity can become unhealthy. So I'll define kind of unhealthy first before we go into healthy, because I think what happens is because there's this, okay, this is what a man should be like, right? Unhealthy masculinity is when someone feels a pressure, whether that's a man or a woman or whoever, feels a pressure to uphold these very masculine stereotypes all the time, even when the situation doesn't call for it, right? So it's like the end of the spectrum of masculinity. They feel like they're trapped in that bubble and that's who they are all the time. They can only be angry. They can only do things by themselves, because if they deviate away into more feminine traits, all of a sudden they're less of a man. And that's kind of our definition of toxic masculinity, is when a man or woman, but usually it's men, just feel pressured to just be traditionally masculine all the time, even when the situation is not calling for it. So then healthy masculinity looks like a balance. It's the ability to navigate a spectrum of emotions, right? To be assertive, but also to be nurturing, to be, I guess, competitive when the time calls for it, and to be caring. And we run this activity with the boys where we kind of ask them, what situation in real life calls for us to be assertive and competitive? And usually they'll say, on a footy field. Yep, exactly. Perfectly fine to display those more masculine traits. But then would it be appropriate to then go back to your home and to your loved ones and have this competitive and assertiveness? Probably not. And so therefore we kind of teach these men that it's okay to step out of this man box, right? And dive into more feminine traits or whatever that may be, when the situation is calling for it.
Yeah. I often think about man traits and I love that man box, that, or the masculinity box that you just referred to. But man traits are in essence, partly feminine as well. We are nurturing guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we don't allow ourselves to show that from that traditional mindset as well. And that's been, I guess, harnessed through decades, if not centuries. And this way of men have to be the breadwinner, the provider, the safekeeper, and women are the child bearers and so forth. And I think we're seeing a good push in recent years. And I'm a dad, so I take the stay-at-home dad as an example of trying to flip that discourse and say, hang on, we are nurturing and we are caring and we can do these type of roles as well, and flip the discourse as well, which is very valuable. And I think Man Up's doing a great job of that. Before I even booked this interview, I'm going to have an admission that I first saw Man Up on Instagram. And when I set up my Instagram page as well, and I was searching for like-minded individuals or businesses who into the more healthy masculinity, and I saw Man Up and I thought, I didn't go into the profile because I thought Man Up is harnessing this traditional masculine, you got to be a man, you got to be tough and so forth. And so I was pleasantly surprised, and the International Mental Health Conference that we both went to, and you're a keynote speaker there, how it was the total opposite. So my perception from the outside was like, oh no, this is going to be one of those hyper masculine, toughen up guys, but it was the complete opposite. And I'm really excited by that. And that's why I wanted to get you on the show, because you had this PowerPoint presentation where it talks around what the differences or what Man Up actually means when we break it down through each letter of the word. Mm-hmm. So before we get into that, because I really want to explore that, because it is really helpful for looking at how men can potentially be, is can you talk around what specifically is Man Up? You mentioned that you go into schools and work with young guys in schools, and how did it come about, and why is this an important thing that you think is needed in schools today?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you said that about the name, because we've had schools kind of turn us down before they actually look into us, and they're like, oh, actually, this is not what they do. So we're kind of looking into rebranding some of our things right now, because we don't want that to be the first impression. But yeah, the name is definitely like a pun, you know what I mean? We're trying to flip it. And in fact, we want Man Up to mean something new. And for that to mean for you to check in on your mates, for that to mean to be vulnerable, to open up, to be a healthy masculinity, right? So what we do is we're a not-for-profit based in Perth right now, and we travel around schools all across WA, speaking to boys about how to be a healthy man, navigating relationships, as well as mental health. And the way that we kind of run our model is that we have a group of volunteers, right? So our whole organization is actually voluntary run right now. We're still working to get like paid positions and stuff. We're all volunteers. And so our volunteers are aged between 18 to 25. And it's kind of an age where young kids at school look at us like, oh yeah, they're very close to our age. So we're going to listen to them a bit more than they would to like an older man or a teacher, right? Because a lot of their education around these topics have come from their school teachers, where maybe they don't feel so comfortable talking about some things because they see these teachers every day. So we go in, maybe we'll take about 10 to 15 of us volunteers. We'll split up a whole cohort of 100 boys or so into small groups. And we make sure that these boys split up into groups of their friends, because we want to make sure that this impact is lasting after we leave. And usually it works better when they're with friends. You know what I mean? They hear each other's stories. They see each other's vulnerabilities. So we run 3 workshops with the boys. Our first one is called Male Culture, which looks at breaking down traditional masculine stereotypes and helping boys come up with their own definition of what it means to be a healthy man, right? Embracing all traits. And with that workshop as well, we kind of go through how you can call out a mate if they're engaging in unhealthy behaviors. And we also look at porn, right? Realistic porn and the consumption of it and how it can be unhealthy at times and how we can do it safely. Our second workshop is about male relationships. And that's where we help the boys identify, first and foremost, we need to have a strong relationship with ourselves and understand what our boundaries are. And then how we can navigate communication with others, whether that be a romantic relationship or with friends or with family. And the biggest component of that session is our consent education. And look, we know that schools talk about consent, but we do it in a very, very realistic way. We give our own examples as volunteers who are young and, going to parties and doing the similar things that they do. And we share our own stories. And then the third workshop is probably our most powerful one. It's our mental health one, where we almost kind of slowly introduce it into them, right? We build a rapport through the first 2 workshops. We get them laughing with us and making jokes. And in the third session, we change the tone up and we go in a bit serious. And we break down some stigmas around mental health, helping the boys understand that it's normal to sort of have these feelings come up. We run through what are some coping mechanisms that are potentially healthy to deal with when things get stressful. And the final part of this is where we kind of allow the boys to reflect on their own mental health journey. And we facilitate this by first us as volunteers opening up, telling the boys about our own mental health journey while we volunteer with this organization, something significant in our life. And we then encourage the boys with a piece of paper and a pen to reflect. And usually at the end of that workshop, the boys will come back and all of a sudden the moods change. There's like this air of like openness and vulnerability. And we actually ask the boys if there's anyone here that's brave enough to share what they wrote down. And sometimes no one says anything, but sometimes you'll get groups where it's the boys who appear the most toughest, the most rowdy. All of a sudden, this one kid is telling us about the darkest things that's happened or an experience that happened 5 years ago. And then they start crying, and then another boy opens up, and all of a sudden we've got this ripple effect of these boys showing each other this vulnerability. And other kids, tell us, I've never told this story to any of my mates before. And at the end of the session, these 15 boys hugging each other. I'm here for you, bro. Like, I love you, bro. That's magic in itself, and I don't think that environment can be facilitated if not for an external organization coming in and an external organization of young people that have very similar experiences, right? So then we finish off with like basically a card on how you can check in on a friend, which is the whole Man Up acronym, because we want to make sure that they're okay after we leave. So that's what we do. But I can say that this work has really brought fulfillment into my life as well and into the volunteers, because us as a community of volunteers have also now stepped into like learning ourselves what it means to be a healthy man, because we didn't have those examples growing up, So if we can hold each other accountable and then go into schools and then teach these kids, we're now creating a whole system of change.
Wow, it sounds amazing. Like, I'd never had anything like this at my school growing up, and that's quite a while. I'm getting old now, getting quite a while now. But what made you go get together with your mates and say, hey, we've got to create this thing where we can go into schools? Like, where was the inspiration for that, and how did that all come about? Who's involved? I guess also, like, how has the schools taken it? Have they really accepted it, embraced it? What's some of the positives there as well?
Yeah, for sure. So, going off that whole story for me that happened in 2017, that was a spark of me wanting to work in this space and realizing the issue of mental health. And like I said, it wasn't until I opened up that my other friends started opening up. And I had very close mates tell me that they were close to taking their own life. friends who I literally saw every single day, and I had no clue about it. A year or so went by, and I sort of do anything because I was like, oh yeah, whatever. Like mental health is important. Let me just keep it between my mates, and we'll focus on it. I then went on this leadership conference to Los Angeles in 2019, and I had the opportunity to actually share my story with the boys. And I spoke for about 5 minutes on stage, and afterwards, I had a queue of boys lining up afterwards, being like, "Man, I went through the same thing. Like, thank you for sharing. Thank you for opening up." Every single kid, and I was like, "Wow! Like, this problem goes beyond my friendship group. It's gone all across the globe." So when I came back, I had one more elective of university left, and so I picked a new unit, which was a unit that helped entrepreneurs start up a new business, essentially, right? And so I went in with this idea of like, I want to do something around men's mental health, men's suicide. And so through that 12-week journey, I kind of started working on what is a problem that exists. And the problem that exists is masculine stereotypes pressuring men to be a certain way. And so as I started doing this and working on this unit at university, I had brunch with a mate of mine called Hasib. And I told him about this idea. And he's like, wow, can I join you? I was like, let's do it. So he was my co-founder. And from that moment, Man Up kind of became a thing because after the 12 weeks finished, it was up to us to keep it going. And we wanted to keep it going because we both had experiences. He had experiences around less so the mental health, but more so around the toxic masculinity, you know what I mean, and how it's affected the women in his life. So we came together December 2019. And then you know what happened in 2020? We had COVID hit. So we tried to like roll out into schools, just like us sending emails, right? No one had any idea who we were. They're like, what are these guys doing? So 2020, we didn't see like any schools. Like it was just a complete failure. But because we were passionate about it, and I think that was the key for making this business work, was passion. We're like, no, we're not going to give up. So we ended up recruiting like a committee of friends and family that wanted to help out, and basically built up an online presence. We had webinars, we had Zoom sessions. And what we soon noticed was that the community was really needing this. So many men and women were like, wow, this is actually quite important. And no one's doing it. So then 2020, we try our best. We email schools again. And we actually end up going to speak at both my and Hasib's old schools. We did it for free. We did it with like no plan. And look, it wasn't the best session, but we knew that there was something there, right? 2021 comes along and we've got a committee now. We've got like our workshop set up. We email the schools again. And again, maybe like 3 or 4 were like, yeah, we'll give it a go. And we went in and it went well, but we still had a lot of work to do. We got nominated for these awards in 2021, Channel 7, like Young News Awards. Someone nominated us and we actually won. And we were like, wow, okay. It looks like people care about this work and it's important. And then when we won that award, it kind of opened up this whole doorway because when we started sending emails again, the schools looked us up and they saw that we were like an award winner. We had an email, we had a social media account that looked legit now. And then they started taking us in. And basically, once the school got us in, they were like, wow, you're coming back next year. And that's kind of what it's been. So since then, we, you know, from having no schools in 2020, we're now at about 2 to 3 schools a week, which is really great. And like I said, I work full time, so I'm actually not even able to volunteer all the time, but we've got a whole community of young volunteers going about now. So our committee consists of about 15 boys, and then our volunteer base is about 50 members. So it's growing slowly, but we're very hopeful that we can eventually create a more sustainability within this business.
Wow, what a story. What was it like on your very first session? Were you like just shaking in your boots? How were you going, like processing all those emotions? And then also the aftermath, like the sigh of relief. How did that feel?
Yeah, well, our first session was actually a big PowerPoint. It wasn't the small groups thing because it was just me and him, right? And so it kind of didn't go too well. Like kids were just talking in the background, and that's why we were like, okay, something needs to change here. We need to make this a small group thing. But then we had a few sessions at my old school after that. And that was when I was like, wow, this is like going really well because the kids, like, the kids just loved it. Like it was received so well from the actual students themselves. They were like, add me on Snapchat. Like, what's your Instagram? You know what I mean? Like they were just wanting to keep the connection going. So I could tell that these boys were craving conversations like this, you know? So yeah, it was a disaster at the start, but now it's refined into something a lot better.
Oh, wow. So let's go through what Man Up actually is, like the acronym for it. So it starts off with M, and I'm going to, sorry for anybody listening, we're going to spell it out for you, how to man up. Make conversation. Tell us a bit about what does this mean and how actually, because you work with a lot of students, for the dads listening out there from based on your experience with the students, how can we have these conversations with our sons?
For sure. So I'll rewind it a little bit to just clarify that this MAN UP acronym is really like a strategy that we can use to check in on someone if we think that something might be up with their mental health, right? It's kind of come about from the whole mental health first aid. So we've just modified it to fit the MAN UP acronym a bit better. So making conversation is step one. And basically what that means is if you notice that someone is going through something, how can we create a discussion to maybe dive into it? And we want to identify that someone might be going through something mentally. And the way that we can do that usually is a change in behavior, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're sad all the time, but it could mean that they're just acting differently than what they normally do. If you know that your son loves playing video games or loves going to play soccer in the afternoons, and for like the last 2 weeks, he's like, oh, I'm just going to stay in bed today. That's enough of a sign to be like, oh, something might be up, okay? So then we want to make that conversation rather than just being like, hey, what's up? Obviously, they're going to say, I'm good, right? Or nothing much. We want to actually dive into that conversation with a bit more detail. Hey, I noticed that you haven't been coming to soccer training for 2 weeks now. You love soccer. Are you all good? So you kind of go into it with a bit more detail into why you're asking them the question in the first place. If you're close enough with this person, and usually this whole acronym really only works if you're close with this person. If they're close, they'll say, yeah, man, I'm just feeling pretty stressed out. Like something's happened. And basically you've made the conversation, right? They start talking. So that's the M. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I'm going to go A next. So actively listen. Tell us a bit about how we do this.
That's it. So I think actively listening is a thing that's very hard for men to do, especially older men like dads. Because us as guys, sometimes we're very wired to just try to fix a problem straight away. You know, like, oh, I'm stressed out because I'm going through this homework. Oh, okay, then let's do this instead. You know what I mean? Like you really want to just push a solution to them. Actively listening is a process of just listening while they vent out everything that's in their body. Just get it out. And you listen with open ears and you listen without judgment. That's key because maybe this person, this friend, their goldfish died, right? Something for you that doesn't seem like a big deal, but for them, that's like the most important person in their life, right? You want to just not judge that. And rather than responding with a solution, you want to validate their experience. Man, that sounds really tough. It must be really hard. You know, you validate it because that's probably the first time in their life that someone's been agreeing with their feelings. Like, oh my God, someone agrees that this is tough. Like, it's a relief, right? That's really important. So actively listening just means to listen without giving a solution and without judging.
I love that. In the concept of actively listen, I do a lot of work because I'm a therapist as well. So I do a lot of holding space and actually allowing silence, the awkward silence that everyone tries to fill. How do you guys do that in your groups with the young fellas? Like, is silence something that's cherished, and how can we do that from maybe a dad's perspective with their son?
Yeah, silence definitely is cherished. And we really see that come about in our mental health session when we get the boys back in a circle and we ask if anyone would like to share. And there's normally like a good 30 seconds of no one speaking. But in that 30 seconds, there's so much reflecting in here, you know? And often it's the inability to articulate what they have going on. So we need to give them that space and that time. That's what pausing can do. It can give someone the time to articulate because although it might feel awkward for you, for them, they're thinking about something, you know? And you don't want to cut them off. You don't want to rush something that's important to them because then they're going to feel invalidated. They're going to be like, oh, my problem's not big enough because they don't even want to give some time to it. You know what I mean? So you want to pause, but obviously you don't want to like force it out of them either. Sometimes you might not be the person to get it out of them, or maybe sometimes they're just not ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I went to a men's retreat a couple of weeks ago and we did an exercise where we're in groups of 3 and each person was had 5 minutes to talk about a particular topic. And the other 2, their role was to actively listen and hold the space, but also not feel any silence. So it was a real good big challenge of grown men trying not to fix anything or solve anything, just to let it happen. And what happened though is like we'd have these awkward pauses. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, a minute might go past. And then the guy that was his turn to share would share a little bit more and then a little bit more and then maybe tear up or whatever he needed to do to just feel good in that moment, even just to reflect as well. Because, you know, I went through about 2 minutes of just not saying anything and then at the end saying, oh, this exercise has made me reflect in this way, which is not something that I would have had the opportunity if someone had filled that that void, the silence with chatter as well, which is it's human nature. We always do it. So I love that one. Now, the next one I particularly like because it's all around self-compassion, I believe, anyway. So it's N for nurture. Tell us a bit about nurture and why this is important, particularly when traditional masculinity probably pushes this kind of, I guess, reflective or personal quality away.
Yeah, for sure. So nurture is the third step of checking in on a friend or a mate or a son. And basically, now that you've had that conversation, you've listened to their problem, all you want to do is try to be there as the best friend that you can be. You don't want to force anything. You want to nurture your relationship with them and their ability to, feel good within themselves, that whole self-compassion. So sometimes nurturing might look like, with the example of the whole soccer practice thing, it might be like, hey, bro, how about I pick you up tomorrow afternoon to take you to soccer and then I'll drop you back home. Like, you make the process easy. Or you might be like, hey, man, I know you've been stressed out because of this happening in your life. How about we go watch a movie on the weekend? So you do what's best in your ability to help them, because we're not all therapists. We're not all trained to fix the issue, but we are good friends and we're trained to keep that relationship alive, right? And as you sort of begin this spark of nurturing, they then realize within themselves how important it is to then nurture those things that made them feel good in the first place, because usually our habits can help us stay mentally healthy, right? So if they know that, playing exercise or going to the gym makes them feel good, you'll be there to help them, guide them. But hopefully where you're reigniting the spark within them for them to then be like, oh, it's true, that does make me feel good. I'm going to keep going, right? That's what nurturing kind of looks like.
Absolutely. I was envisioning this picture of a seed growing out of the ground and nurturing itself. You got to nurture it for it to grow into a thriving plant. And it's the same for us as people. We need to look after ourselves, but also if we're tending to somebody else, look after them as well in a nurturing way. That isn't trying to solve anything. It's just trying to be there and provide a connection space. I think that's really important as well in order for ourselves to grow as well. I think that's really great.
100%.
Now this is where I come in, someone like me comes in,
yes.
But utilizing professional help, and my professional help came 20 years after I was first experiencing symptoms of mental illness. And so it took me a long time, and a lot of older guys maybe bottle it up for a very long time. Even younger guys bottle it up too. But why is seeking professional help hard? And I think in your work with students in schools, what's some of the things that they're looking for in terms of professional help as well?
For sure. So the reason why we use professional help as the next step is because sometimes, like I said, we don't have the actual credibility to help someone or help them with this specific issue if it's quite deep-seated, right? And so professional help is basically someone who has a qualification to help. And often the examples we think about are psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, therapists, but it even goes a bit deeper than that. And sometimes a teacher can be qualified. Sometimes a school chaplain can also be helpful. Someone that's a bit more experienced, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily like the doctor, okay? And so I think the reason why it's so hard to see professional help is because the stigma around professional help now is I only need to see someone if I'm broken, right? If something's wrong with me. And because we as men, we don't want to admit that something's wrong with us, we're going to put that aside. No, I don't need that. I'm not bad. I'm all good, right? Instead, we need to look at professional help the same way you would look at a personal trainer or a coach. If you want to be an athlete and get better, you got to hire a coach, right? If you want to be better mentally, whether that's if you're feeling ill or just trying to get better in life as a human being, why wouldn't you want to have someone whose job it is to make you feel better mentally, right? That's a psychologist. And I use the example myself, whereas I'm in a very good place mentally, but I still see a psychologist every month or so because it just helps me be better. Why would I not want to, you know what I mean? And when you frame it like that, people are like, oh, true. It is like that. It's someone that's there to just help you be better, help you with strategies, help you to see insights into your own way of being that you would never would have figured out by yourself, right? So I think eliminating the stigma is step one, I think another big barrier as well is people think it's really expensive, but we tell the boys, that if you go with your parents or if you're over 18, you can apply for a mental health care plan, right? Where if you go to the GP, and that's another thing, they don't know where to go to see psychologists. We just tell them, go to your normal doctor, your general practitioner, and tell them what's been on your mind. And you tell them you want to be seeing a psychologist. It's such a simple process, and they'll make you fill out a little form and then give you 20 subsidized sessions or sometimes half price or even more, which is a huge discount, right? Obviously, it can't be free, but then there are free options like counseling and other avenues where it can be offered for free. But I think when we let boys know that, that's the first time they've heard that information in their whole life. They're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I can see a psychologist for half price 20 times in a year, which is huge. So yeah, that's what youth professional help is. It's how can you help someone who's maybe got some deeper issue that you actually can't help yourself, and you help them to organize that. You could be the one to call up the doctors and be like, hey, I'd like to book an appointment, and you drop them at the appointment, you pick them up at the appointment, you make the process as easy and as non-confronting as possible.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind as you're saying that. The first is, I think what I loved about the mental health conference was it was around valuing the lived experience. So we have a whole bunch of people with learned experience, and I've got learned experience, but I've also got lived experience as well. And I think the volunteers that work with Man Up, yourself included, have a huge amount of lived experience that can often be better than a paid professional. It's just about having that space where it's someone who can nurture the conversation, can hold the space, can actively listen. Sometimes that's all we need as well. We don't need necessarily to go and pay hundreds of dollars for a session, even if it is subsidized as well. So there's that element as well. So I don't think, don't sell yourself short with your lived experience in terms of helping guys out.
100%.
The other one is, and I love talking about this next point, is around the cost of therapy.
Yeah.
As guys, and I did the same as well when I was growing up, is we're happy to get together with our mates, go down to the pub or a club, have a feed, get on the piss. You know, sometimes it could be staying in accommodation, it could be taxis home, and this could cost hundreds of dollars, right, for a Saturday night out on the town. And, you know, we kind of use it as like, oh, yeah, I need this for me. And it's a slaps on a Band-Aid for all the underlying stuff that they're trying to hide from as well. Yeah, if they paid that same amount of money to a therapist, even if they're not broken, that session, that could be 2 or 3 sessions with as a psychologist, counselor, social worker, whoever it is. I'm not adverse to people seeing life coaches as well, PTs, exercise phys, any sort of profession that can help you just be the best version of yourself. I think if we can change this mindset and look at it as tuning up our body as opposed to repairing our body, we might have less incidences of perhaps suicide in Australia or family and domestic violence as well, because we see it as more of a self-care thing and not I'm broken, I need to go fixed. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around that kind of concept. And is that something that you talk about with your mates or the guys that you work with as well?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely amongst my mates, like, all of my friends see psychologists, you know, which is crazy. And that didn't happen 5 years ago, but it took us all being like, actually, there's no harm in seeing someone who's going to help. In fact, it's just better, right? It's literally better. So, yeah, I think that's such a key, is like, it's flipping that script around rather than looking at us like damaged people, is how can we tune up and level up, become an even better version of myself. And look, I'm a personal trainer myself as well. And I love it when people come and talk to me as well, because it's just them trying to be better. And I think physical and mental should have the same amount of focus, because right now, a lot of it's in the physical. Like, oh, if I've broken an arm, I'm going to go to a doctor. But if I'm feeling stressed out, I'm not going to go to see a doctor. We need to learn to see them both as equally, or maybe mental, even more important, because if you don't work on your mind, everything else will also suffer as well. Whether that be your career, your relationships, your body, your health. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing a lot of that in the burnout space with a lot of people, particularly during COVID and post then, is just burning out because they're not tuning into the psychological side of themselves. They're just pushing through, high demand jobs, stress for finances, family life, whatever, school life. You know, school's stressful as in itself, you know, trying to keep up with the Kardashians and all the social media comparison stuff like that as well. But yeah, if we can tune into the psychological side, I think so many more things can just fall into place and be a lot more sustainable and easy as well. And we wouldn't see, I guess, this mental health crisis that we do see in 2023 and beyond as well, which kind of leads into personal care. And I think this kind of coincides with nurture as well in the acronym. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts on what is personal care, how can we do it?
For sure. So the way that it's kind of laid out in our whole acronym is that often when we're helping others have a relatively low like frequency or vibrations, and the energy is always like low, it can take a toll on us, right? We can start to feel guilty about things that we have. We can start feeling tired from helping them around, running around. And the worst thing you can do is be deflated and try to help someone else, right? So personal care is essentially make sure you're taking care of yourself throughout this whole process. We know that in an airplane, when they say that the cabin pressure drops, to put your own mask before you help others, because if you don't put your own one on, you might die, right? And the way that I look at it is like, you want to fill up your own cup and then you give from the overflow, right? So when you're helping others, you want to be coming in with the good vibration, good energy, because that's going to motivate them naturally anyways, right? It's less likely that you're going to kind of drop below and get into a bad mental health place yourself as well. Because if you're taking care of yourself, you're going to lift someone else rather than them bringing you down. So personal care is just like a thing to just keep in mind. Like, make sure you're always looking after yourself. You're practicing the things that you're telling your friend to do as well, because you want to set an example. And often telling people what to do, they're not going to listen. But when they see you embodying a way of living that's like healthy and motivating, they want to be like, I want some of that. You know, what do you want? So personal care is like, how can you set the example as well?
Yeah. What's some things that you do for personal care for you?
So many things. You know, I meditate every morning. That's kind of something that I've been doing for the last 5 years or so. And that's really helped me to ground myself, to kind of lower my anxiety to an extent and just give me more clarity. I go to the gym. I train almost every single day as well. And that, again, is something that it's an outlet for me to let go of some of the energy that I might store. I remember when I used to get angry and hurt myself, I instead now channel that into like the gym. You know what I mean? I also hang around some really supportive friends when I need to and talk to them when things are on my mind. That's really helped me as well. I think eating well is something that has been a big focus for me as well, because I've noticed that whenever I'm eating foods that are unhealthy, I kind of feel bad, and naturally it kind of spirals me downwards as well. Whereas when I'm feeling good, it builds this momentum where I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat well, I'm going to stay fit. And that's really helped me as well. And also reading. And that's kind of like another element of mindfulness where it just slows my brain down, because often it's the own mind that really drives me crazy. So if I can find a way to just calm it down, see the world for what it really is, it really alleviates a bit of that stress and a bit of that anxiety.
Yeah, I love those points as well. And I think even in the conversations, like I loved how you say you fill your cup and then give some of the excess or the overflow as well. What would you say to a young man who's in one of your sessions and maybe he's over his head, he can't help his mate and he's not sure what to do? What's some advice you could give someone like that? Where could they turn to? Is it okay to be in that kind of safe space as well?
For sure, for sure. And I think that point brings back to the whole boundaries activity that we do with the kids. You know, we tell them, be there for someone, help them out, but have your boundaries in place, because the worst thing you can do, and a lot of young men do this when they get a girlfriend for the first time, is they give everything to this person, right? I'll be the best boyfriend, I'll be the best friend, I'll do whatever you want. But we always know how that ends up, right? You'll lose the girlfriend or whatever happens. So we ask them to really have a strong think about what their boundaries are on a physical level, on a mental level. What is your line? Like, how far are you willing to go? And once you've set that, when you're in a pretty good mental state, like when nothing's going on in your life, you then stick to it. So when stuff does start to hit the fan and maybe you found that you're helping a lot of people, you take that time to look at those boundaries and be like, okay, I know that I'm pushing the boundary right now. If I keep going, I'm probably going to end up in a bad place mentally. So how can I get back within my boundaries? So it's just by having that clarity. We tell them you need to actually like write it out, know what your boundaries are, because when you get stressed out, we often forget. And we just move into like this whatever, you know, we forget about the things that keep us feeling well. So we need to make sure we can do the things that keep us well when we're well, and make them habits as well.
And I think one of the things that comes to mind is if you're having a conversation that you feel like you're over your head and there's nobody else around, helping your mate to connect in with somebody else is really helpful. Like if it's a family member, or say, hey, can I drop you off at your GP?
Mm-hmm.
Or hey, let's call Lifeline together or Kids Helpline together or something. And I'm just going to sit in the background and I'm just going to support you in a non-active way. And that can also help as well. That can help us come back from the brink of being at our limits and help our mates out as well. I think that's really useful too. And I've used that personally myself. I found myself before I was a social worker in that very situation where I had to say, I can't help this situation, but I can connect you, I can nurture you in the best way that I can. Now, Gareth, I've really enjoyed this, and I appreciate you coming on from all the way across the other side of Australia. But what's next for Man Up? I'd like to hear a bit about your next plans. Do you do East Coast work as well, or is it just in WA, or what's going on for the next 12 months or so?
Yeah, so currently we're just in WA. I think our plan really is eventually to go, nationwide, and to make this a very big kind of organization. But we first need to do a lot of internal restructuring. So one of our goals is to kind of set up a board, have a lot of our like legal documents completely in place and finalized, and just get some salary positions going, because I think no matter what kind of work you do, you need to reward the people working for you. So that's kind of what our plan is. We're really trying to just like make us bulletproof from the inside going out, because we grew very quickly, quicker than we could have ever imagined. And so now we're like picking up the pieces. And so next 12 months, we want to make sure that we're ready to go. We've got people paid to work. And then eventually, once that's good, we're then going to hopefully deploy like bases out where like we have like a team that is in Adelaide. We have a team that's in Melbourne, and then they run their own operations over there. But that might take a few years. I think we're hopeful though, because like I said, we're getting a lot of support, and any support is helpful. You know, like we do rely on grants from the government, from corporate companies and stuff like that as well. So if there's anyone listening that'd love to help us out, you know, please reach out, obviously. But yeah, that's kind of the plan. And I think a big part of my involvement in Man Up as a co-founder is to keep setting the example, because I often tell the young volunteers that Man Up was made for me. Like, it was to remind me of how to be a healthy man, because I didn't grow up in an environment where this was normal. You know, like I'm constantly unlearning a lot of my masculine behaviors to adapt a healthier way to be. And so if I can keep setting the example by being a healthy man myself, I can be confident that I'm helping the younger generation to then carry that forward going through as well.
I love it. So how can people find you if they are interested in maybe being a sponsor or connecting in with their schools? How can people find you?
Of course. So the best way for Man Up would be our email, and that is team@manupwa.org.au. And you can find us on social media and LinkedIn as well. We're just man_up_WA. We post a lot of content on there. So if you want to be updated with what we do and what we're up to, follow our Instagram. That'll probably be your best bet as well.
Wonderful. And I'll put the links in the show notes so people can easily access that. Gareth, last question I always ask everybody is to plug something that makes them feel good. And so this is a bit of a pay it forward moment where you could be reading something or watching something or listening to something or doing something that makes you feel good, and maybe can share it with the audience so that they can maybe try it out for themselves too.
For sure. Something that I've been trying with, especially this week actually, is to stop complaining. And that's really helped me, because I found that recently I've just had a bit of financial stress and things going on. But then I reflected on the present moment, and I'm like, in the present moment right now, nothing is actually wrong. And the more I complain, the more I attract that things to complain about. So how about maybe just as an experiment to try and flip the script? What can I instead be grateful for right now that I do have in my life? And just by doing that over this week, I felt immensely better. I've been grateful for having clean water, for a house, for friends in my life, for the ability to come on a podcast like this, right? I think that really helps. It's just checking your gratitude and your perspective and realizing that there's so much in life. We don't need to be complaining all the time.
I love it. Gratitude does make things seem a lot less hard.
Yes.
But Gareth, thanks so much for coming on and spending some time with me today, talking about men's mental health, but also how we can man up in a different and healthy way. So I really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to have this message spread out.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.